Hey everybody, it is Monday, October 30th, 2023. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts. Moshe, I appreciate that you threw the year in there.
You know, listen, we have like 2 months left, crazy enough, of 2023. Good riddance. Ready for 2024 already. But, you know, new week. We're trying something different in the intro. Mix it up for people. Know it's a new episode. Anyway, with that said, this is the place where we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I noticed on the gram the Halloween costumes this year.
That's right. And we're not just talking about the kids. I was a Michigan cheerleader.
The adults are getting into it, everybody.
Yes, my husband was an Ohio State football player. As he was getting ready, he had these things that he was putting under his eyes, and he put like this towel into his waistline. And I looked at him, I'm like, I feel like you've been waiting your whole life for tonight. And he's
Wait,
like,
you guys, you're telling me that despite the whole Ohio State Michigan thing you guys have going on, you've never done it for Halloween?
No, because we've never really done Halloween together. Like we got married just a few years ago. We had 2 kids. COVID, the pandemic. So this was kind of the first Halloween party that we went to as a couple. So it was the logical costume. Yeah, but no, we've never done it.
And the kids getting ready for their trick-or-treating, is that tomorrow?
That's right. That is tomorrow. My son is too young to partake, but my daughter is very excited. Let's just hope the weather cooperates.
I feel like she's the perfect age for I've seen a lot of Elsas right around that age bracket.
I think that was more last year. This year, I'm embarrassed to even admit she's going as an Ohio State cheerleader. I didn't want to say it because it's like it feels like something is wrong with our house.
I see that she takes after dad. She's going with the Ohio State side.
Yes, I had a couple of years where she was rooting for both of us, Michigan and Ohio State, and I don't know what happened. I think it's just that my husband is so much more passionate about it, and she's it is a Buckeye house with the exception of me. I did notice baby Olivia in some very cute costumes as well.
Yeah, so our little pumpkin was a pumpkin on Saturday, as she just turned 5 weeks. Jill, I love these moments. Like on Sunday morning, I realized that she can start to mimic my facial expressions. So I was smiling, and then she was smiling back, and I'm like, whoa. And I like yelled to the room to Alex. I was like, oh my God, write it down. October 29th, she's smiling back at us.
And it just gets better from here. You know, it's the words and laugh and giggles and all of it. I mean, it's just as they develop personalities, it's awesome. So I'm very excited for you guys.
And I will say we ran into a few Mo News fans over the weekend as we were making our way around Brooklyn. It was a really nice day. It was like almost 80 degrees on Saturday in New York in late October. And we were out there and somebody came up and said, listen, huge fan of what you guys are doing, which is so great. We love to hear from all of you. But people were out and about in all the various costumes. And we have a few more coming up. Jill, we have a Winnie the Pooh family themed situation coming to your Instagram feed in the coming day.
I also want to mention, of course, the news is just so awful these days. And I couldn't take any more of it. So I posted something, tell me something good. And I was flooded with just awesome stuff. People who had babies and, oh, my granddaughter was born, or someone who said that their scan for lung cancer came back negative. Just like really cool stuff, pictures of dogs, this, that, and the other thing. And with that, I got a ton of just really nice notes, and one note in particular from somebody that I shared as well on Instagram, as did you, just talking about this podcast and how much it meant to them to just feel like they were getting a full picture of the news, which eventually I promise we will get to. But thank you. I feel like social media can be a toxic place. Yes. as you, and we'll get to it, have learned unfortunately this weekend as well. But a big thank you to everybody who wrote in. Those comments are so incredibly appreciated by us. We read them. It's amazing.
Yeah, they're the fuel that keeps us going. I mean, I told that person in Brooklyn, one of the people who ran into us this weekend, I was like, there are moments where I want to just delete the Instagram account and cancel this thing altogether. Because it is very trying doing this on a daily basis. So we appreciate the notes. We appreciate that you appreciate the show. We appreciate hearing from you. So thank you all. And let's get to the news. There were some negative developments over the weekend, but we will, as always, end on a positive note.
Okay. That's right. Yeah.
Are you ready?
No.
Are you ready, Jill?
But
Let's do it.
I don't think we have a choice. You got to give the people what they came for.
All right.
All right, here are the headlines. The latest from the Middle East. Israel expanding its ground invasion into Gaza. More aid is getting into the Gaza Strip, but not nearly enough as the humanitarian situation on the ground gets more dire. And the war spilling into other parts of the world. A mob in Russia storms an airport looking for Jews. Moshe, you said it was 2023, but it feels like it's like 1923 in terms of the pogroms in Russia.
Yeah.
Back here in the U.S., Joe Biden has got himself a primary challenger. So who exactly is Dean Phillips? And on the Republican side, one down, former VP Mike Pence dropping out of the race. Some sad news over the weekend. Friends star Matthew Perry dies at the age of 54. Plus an update to that mass shooting in Maine. Worker protests continue. CVS and Walgreens employees planning a walkout to protest working conditions. And as promised, some lighter news to end the podcast. We're talking Halloween, but it's not actually good news. For the second Halloween in a row, U.S. candy inflation hits double digits.
Though we have other elements, including candy trends, Jill, candy corn making a comeback. I'm looking at you, Utah. Apparently, that is the number one candy in Utah. We need to discuss.
All right, and Moshe has on this day in history.
Jill, a look back at one of the most famous fake news stories of all time, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, and a big moment in Adele history. As in the singer, not the computer brand.
Thank you for clearing that up. All right.
Just letting you know.
All right, now to the news. Nearly 36 trucks entered Gaza on Sunday in the largest aid convoy since the war began between Israel and Hamas. But humanitarian workers say that the assistance is still falling desperately short of the needs after thousands of people broke into warehouses to take flour and basic hygiene products. Communications were restored to most of Gaza's 2.3 million people on Sunday after an Israeli bombardment described by residents as the most intense of the war knocked out phone and internet services late Friday. The Israeli military say that they have not started a full ground invasion as of yet, but have started what they say is the second phase of the war, with more ground incursions into Gaza. On Sunday, Israel struck more than 450 terrorist targets over the past 24 hours, including Hamas command centers and anti-tank missile launching positions. Huge plumes of smoke were rising over Gaza City. The Hamas and Islamic Jihad groups have continued firing rockets into Israel, including towards its commercial hub, Tel Aviv. So we're now approaching about 8,000 rockets in 3 weeks. And it comes as the humanitarian toll is increasing in Gaza. And it comes as the humanitarian situation is getting worse in Gaza. The Gaza Health Ministry, which of course is run by Hamas, saying that the death toll among Palestinians has passed 8,000, mostly women and minors. For its part, the Israelis say that Hamas has inflated the numbers and that the majority of deaths are actually Hamas terrorists, but there is no independent confirmation so far. The death toll on both sides is really without precedent in decades of Israeli-Palestinian violence. Over 1,400 people have died on the Israeli side, mainly civilians, including babies, murdered during that initial October 7th Hamas terror attack, which is also an unprecedented figure.
Jill, on Sunday, we got an indication of how desperate things are getting in Gaza. Humanitarian aid warehouses in the Strip were broken into. According to the UN, they said it's a worrying sign that civil order is starting to break down after 3 weeks of war and that siege on the Gaza Strip. A UN spokesperson saying people are scared, frustrated, desperate. The UN Palestinian Refugee Agency said crowds broke into 4 facilities over the weekend. Warehouses did not contain any fuel, but did contain food aid and other items that people desperately need. The fuel debate continues right now, and Israel continues to insist that they will not allow fuel into the Gaza Strip because of A, that Hamas has fuel and isn't giving it to the people, and B, that if they allowed more in, it would then go to Hamas to continue to use for their war effort. President Biden was on a call with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu over the weekend. He underscored the need to immediately and significantly increase the flow of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip to assist civilians. Israeli authorities said they will be soon allowing more humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. No details, though, on when and how much and how soon that'll be. Meanwhile, as Israel ratchets things up, residents living near the Shifa hospital, the largest hospital in the Gaza Strip, said that a number of strikes hit nearby. Israel accuses Hamas of having a secret command post beneath the hospital. They made a whole presentation about it late last week. Hamas denies those allegations, though they have put forth videos, the Israelis have, of Hamas terrorists who were captured, admitting that they do have a command post under the hospital. The Israelis have been calling on the hospital to evacuate for more than a week. The facility so far has refused, saying it would mean death for patients on ventilators, and they can't move anyone from there. As of right now, the majority of residents of Gaza have moved from the north to the south under the Israeli push there, though hundreds of thousands still remain in the north, and that comes as the Israelis are looking to push ahead here into the Strip.
Moshe, we have been waiting on this major invasion, this major ground invasion by Israel. What we saw this past weekend, not that. Any sense on when that is coming, if it is still coming?
Yeah, the Israelis are moving very, very slowly here, literally taking yard by yard as opposed to mile by mile. And, Gaza's pretty small, 25 miles by 6 miles. Keep in mind, Hamas has been there for 40 years. They've been in control of the Gaza Strip for 16 years. So they're proceeding very cautiously here. Israel views a ground invasion as necessary to take out Hamas. They see any potential ceasefire, which was called for by the UN General Assembly on Friday, as well as a number of countries individually around the world. They view that as keeping Hamas in place, inspiring new attacks. And so they feel the need to go in there with the hundreds of thousands of reserve soldiers they currently have on the border. Now, there were reports over the weekend, the U.S. and a number of countries in the West reluctant now behind the scenes to endorse this full-on invasion. They're worried about casualties continuing to get higher on both sides and secondary impact on the Arab world. A top Saudi official, the brother of the Crown Prince, actually, KBS, not MBS, is set to be in Washington today. The concern in the Arab world is they have millions of angry citizens, how they might react to more images of bloodshed. It could create instability across the region. It does come, interestingly, Jill, as Arab states behind the scenes say they hate Hamas and they want them to go away, but in public criticize Israel and egg on these massive rallies. So they're sort of playing both ends here, knowing how their publics feel, but also strategically behind the scenes saying, Hamas is a problem, Iran is a problem. Now, the alternate approach proposed by the U.S. and others is continuing aerial strikes, assassinations against Hamas. The Israelis say they've been doing that for more than a decade through several wars, only to see Hamas come back stronger. So this invasion, when are we going to see it? Still unclear. One of the key questions is, can they get more hostages freed before an invasion? The concern is if an invasion happens full on, you're not going to see any more hostages. More than 220 hostages that are currently being held in the Gaza Strip released. Now, don't expect any sort of D-Day style assault. Right now, as I noted, the IDF is moving very cautiously, literally 100 yards at a time, a football field at a time, searching and destroying Hamas booby traps. They have hundreds of miles of tunnels underground. And so they're trying to ensure they do this cautiously with the least amount of casualties on both sides. That's what the Israelis are saying here. But again, it does come as there's concerns in a lot of places that this ground invasion could only make things worse.
And Moshe, as we've talked about on this podcast before, what happens in the Middle East does not stay there. On that note, a mob in Russia's mostly Muslim region of Dagestan stormed one of the airports in search of Jewish passengers arriving from Israel. So if you're on social media, you have probably seen this video. We are talking about hundreds of young men, some carrying Palestinian flags, storming the tarmac, trying to climb onto planes, in some cases trying to break through the windows. The passengers had to either take refuge on the plane or hide in the airport. Health officials on the ground say 2 people have been critically injured. It's not clear who they are or in what way they were injured. They also stormed a hotel in search of Jewish guests. It appears that the riots were perhaps inspired by a number of posts on Telegram, a social media platform. Local religious leaders on the ground say that they may actually need to evacuate about 800 Jewish families from the area. In another city in a neighboring region, a planned Jewish center was set on fire. The former chief rabbi of Moscow saying, quote, "We are receiving reports from 4 different cities in Dagestan of mobs demanding to kill the Jews." Frightening, Moshe, and of course brings to mind the pogroms in Russia, which started in about the 1880s. If you're not familiar, that is when Russians, in a series of attacks, literally killed about 100,000 Jews and forced many to just flee the country entirely.
Yeah, you see a bit of this if you're familiar with the musical Fiddler on the Roof, depicted. It's depicted there, and again, those are basically civilian lynch mobs let loose. Very concerning images coming out of Dagestan. For those unfamiliar, it's sort of down there near Chechnya, Azerbaijan, Georgia, down there in the Caucasus. Again, the Russians saying that's a majority Muslim region, and they tried to get a hold of it. The governor of Dagestan and a number of authorities very concerned about what they said. They said there will be ramifications for those engaged in it, and it was large, Jill. I mean, literally, you saw hundreds and hundreds of people invade the airport, walking the tarmac, demanding to board planes and inspect them for any Jews. Literally, one person in the video, like looking in the engine, saying, it almost beyond belief, almost, like a joke out of Borat. That has become real here.
I'm glad you said that because my husband is not on social media. And I was describing this to him and I'm like, no, like whatever you're picturing, times it by 100. It was that much worse. Yeah. This wasn't like a little mob of 10 people chanting, death to Jews. This was quite serious.
No, they overtook the airport. Authorities were not prepared for it. They've actually closed the airport now for a week as they deal with this. The Prime Minister of Israel, telling the Russians, like, you need to deal with this. Like, you have a country of it's one of the largest populations of Jews in the world actually live in Russia to this day. So very concerning there. Jill, we should note, we were talking about this before the podcast, and those who follow on Instagram will know this by now. First of all, I will say this: hundreds of incredible comments of people who are like, we're in shock and disbelief at what is happening. Also got a note from somebody who's followed for a while who's like, "You Jews deserve this." I'm a Jew. I was like, you followed my account for a year and a half. This is how you actually feel about things. Like, this is how you react to the headlines. So a little shocking, a little concerning. I am the forever optimist here.
Are you still?
It'll all work out. I mean, listen, this is a legitimately scary time. I mean, passions have gotten to beyond. I mean, there were like protests in Brooklyn and protests in London and protests in DC and the protests all over the world this weekend. And a number of those people at protests, I heard from some of them, are like, listen, we're legitimately concerned about the humanitarian crisis and the Palestinian civilians. Yes, like we're all concerned about civilians, etc. Unfortunately, and it's a legitimate concern, and we report on all that stuff here. At the same time, there are people who are overtly anti-Semitic. There are people preaching violence here. There are people justifying the actions of terror groups. And unfortunately, that is overwhelming. I mean, I compared it loosely to the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, where the vast majority of people are seeking social justice and equal rights, etc., an important cause. And unfortunately, there are bad actors in there, some with violent intentions. And we're seeing it and we're hearing it, and it's really concerning. And anyway, I'm still an optimist, Jill. I think cooler heads will prevail at some point. I don't know.
I mean, Moshe, I hope you're right.
I mean, yeah, I mean, listen, I think that we all need to be looking out for each other. And I hope that maybe sometimes, unfortunately, because we're human beings and because it requires really extreme stuff for us to get our act together, images like this will serve as a wake-up call that the concerns of any minority group when it comes to discrimination and threats should not be diminished, should not be questioned. And some people rightfully are frightened right now watching what's going on. So please look out for your fellow human beings. Please take a moment. I know there's like little room these days for nuance and gray areas and a civil dialogue about where we agree, but that is where we need to go. Or like, you'll see what happened here. And by the way, it's not just anti-Semitism that you saw, effectively this happen in Myanmar a few years ago based on Facebook posts. You saw this happen based on based on radio shows in Rwanda in the 90s, the Rwandan genocide, where people saying, look out for the Hutus, look out for the Tutsis, go kill them. And ultimately 1 million people died in 100 days in Rwanda. So social media is the next evolution of this. As you mentioned, this started on Telegram. Some people said there's some stuff happening that we have to go get them. And look how this escalated. Look how quickly this stuff moves. So listen, I don't know how big we are in Dagestan, this podcast, but for the rest of us watching all of this, certainly learned some lessons this weekend.
Moshe, the fear amongst the Jewish community is palpable. And I'm speaking about the Jewish community because I'm part of the Jewish community, and I welcome anybody else to message me and talk to me about what they're going through as well. But I could speak about that because I'm living it. And this is the only thing people will talk about is, are their kids safe going to school? Are they safe in their homes? I am very careful not to repeat things I've heard from other people. It's something actually that you have made me particularly aware of. And so I would never just post something just to post it. I have now heard from numerous people who have had Uber drivers ask them if they are Jewish. And I don't think they're doing that to, compare challah recipes. Like, that's not a good thing.
I love your Hanukkah traditions.
I have heard from many people in the Jewish community who, for the first time in their lives, are contemplating getting a gun, who have said never in their lives did they ever think that would be something that they would do. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because what does that mean? It means that they genuinely think that there is a less than 0% chance that somebody is going to come to their house to try to kill them because they are Jewish. That's what that means. That is the reason that they would get a gun. And so that's where we are. Okay, Moshe, who would think that politics would kind of be like the fun topic?
Save us Washington politics.
Okay, now to 2024 election news. Over the weekend, one door closed and another one opened. Former Vice President Mike Pence officially calling his Republican presidential campaign over, and Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips launched a long shot bid to challenge Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination. So let's start with Dean Phillips. He is a little known moderate Democrat from Minnesota. He announced Friday that he will pursue the Democratic presidential nomination, becoming the party's first elected official to challenge President Biden in the 2024 race. Congressman Phillips represents southern Minnesota. He's centering his campaign on concerns that people have about Biden's age. He is turning 81 in November. Phillips, by the way, is 54. He thinks that he is a viable option for voters who share his concerns that Biden is not the strongest Democrat to go into an election against former President Trump or any of the alternatives. As a moderate, he's advocated for bipartisanship and respect in politics. In the 2018 midterms, he flipped a seat that was held by Republicans. Since then, he has served in the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus and worked with Republicans on legislation to tackle things like military and entrepreneurship issues. Before becoming a politician, he ran his family's wine and spirits business called Phillips Distilling. He even helped launch Talenti Gelato, so he's very wealthy. He is a millionaire. Democrats have shown little interest, though, in backing anyone but Biden. He continues to maintain about 70 to 80% of Democrats in polls, even though they do have significant concerns about his age. And again, that is one reason that Phillips is deciding to run, and also leaning into that weakness. A CNN survey released last month found that 67% of Democratic voters want someone else besides Joe Biden to be the party's nominee in 2024.
They want choices. Only a third backed Biden. There's also an AP poll conducted in August showing 77% of all Americans, 3 out of 4 of all Americans, say Biden is too old to effectively serve as president. That includes nearly 7 out of 10 Democrats. Keep in mind, if he was elected to a second term, Jill, he'd be 86 by the end of his second term. So Phillips here is talking about generational change, especially in a party that is mostly run by people over the age of 70 and 80. Obviously, there's been the handoff from Nancy Pelosi to Hakeem Jeffries in the House. But other than that, between Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, and a bunch of senior Democrats, they're of a certain age. Last year, and Phillips has been outspoken on this. Last year, he was one of a handful of younger lawmakers to call on House Democrats to make that change to the next generation. Eventually, those leaders did step aside, but he wants it to happen on the presidential level. He's very concerned about Biden making it across the finish line here. And there had been talk about him running earlier in the summer. He backed off. A lot of Democrats just scared to challenge Biden here. That basically he's the president. He was able to, hold the Senate, grow the Senate in midterms. He's given credit for that. Republicans are a mess in the House, and he's already beaten Trump once. So some people believe, actually, he can beat Trump again. He may not be our best person, but for Americans, they'll give Biden another shot over bringing Trump back. At least that's the belief among many senior Democrats. But it does come as voter dissatisfaction right now very high with Biden. Only 37% of Americans approve of his job performance, 59% disapproval. Also, some recent polls show that among Democrats, he's losing some job approval. That includes a lot of progressive Democrats who are unhappy with him standing by Israel here, including Arab and Muslim American voters. Though that said, they don't seem to have an ally there in Donald Trump based on those 4 years. So a lot of people in that community scratching their heads saying, we don't love what Biden's doing right now, but also, do we want Trump to come back? So one aspect of an election is turning out your base voters, maxing out your Democrats. If some people stay at home, that's a concern. So that's it on that aspect of it. Obviously, a lot of Democrats are Biden's hoping that one of these 91 felony charges against Trump lands and he's convicted at one of the 4 criminal trials that he's set to have in the next year. One person who was hoping for that to happen sooner than later, Mike Pence. You mentioned he dropped out over the weekend. This was really quick, not altogether surprising. He announces over the weekend that he's been struggling to raise money, garnering support. So as he told people, it's not his time. Remember, Mike Pence was Trump's vice president, but he mainly stood by Trump until January 6th, when he chose not to overturn the election. He stood by that, saying it was unconstitutional what Trump was trying to get him to do. That did not play well in a party that so overwhelmingly likes Trump. Republicans not feeling Pence on that issue, but let's be frank here. There's a lot of lack of energy when it comes to Mike Pence. He can't really light up a room. He's also running on stances that kind of remind you of Republicans back in the 80s or 90s. Not really the populist party that Trump has created here. He's transformed the party. Mike Pence running in the 1990s, trying to excite rooms of 5 to 7 people. Couldn't get the money. Probably wasn't going to make the next debate. So, as a former vice president, he's decided that's it.
Well, we will miss him and the fly and the fly on his head. Is it so sad that the only thing I think about with Mike Pence in a debate is the fly that landed on his hair?
Most vice presidents. What do you think about? Dick Cheney shot a guy. Al Gore once claimed he sort of invented the internet. Vice presidents, Dan Quayle, misspelled tomato. Literally go through vice presidential history. You can remember one thing, and Mike Pence, for many people, it'll be the fly. Poor Mike.
The Dan Quayle. Wait, I thought it was potato. Was it tomato?
Sorry,
no,
it wasn't tomato. It was
potato. Which tells you, yes, it is. It's the only thing I remember about him.
It's been a while. Oh, and until he became president, what was Vice President Biden known for? The time that he said, big effing deal. I mean, at least that's how I remembered him as vice president. He whispered into Obama's ear, but in front of a microphone, this is a big effing deal. And that was 8 years of Biden, everybody.
Time now for the speed read from the LA Times. Friends star Matthew Perry was found dead Saturday in a hot tub at his Los Angeles home. This is according to law enforcement sources, and he was just 54 years old. Authorities responded at about 4 p.m. to his home. He was discovered, again, unresponsive. The sources who spoke on the condition of anonymity because this investigation is still ongoing didn't cite a specific cause of death. No drugs were found at the scene, but a source told the Times that prescription medications were recovered at the home, which means that toxicology will be a part of the investigation. A representative for Perry did not immediately respond to a comment. An LA police captain says the cause of death may not be known for some time, but at this point, foul play is not suspected. The cause of death will be determined by the coroner's office. NBC, which aired Friends for 10 seasons, put out its own statement. They said, "We are incredibly saddened by the too soon passing of Matthew Perry. He brought so much joy to hundreds of millions of people around the world with his pitch-perfect comedic timing and wry wit. His legacy will live on through countless generations." He got his start as a child actor, landing guest spots on Charles in Charge and Beverly Hills 90210. He played opposite River Phoenix in the film A Night in the Life of Jimmy Reardon in the 1980s and early 90s. But his big break came when he was cast in Friends, originally titled Friends Like Us. I did not know that that was the original name. A sitcom, of course, about 6 single New Yorkers navigating adulthood. It premiered on NBC in 1994, and the series soon became a juggernaut, the anchor of the network's Thursday night must-see TV lineup. It turned Perry and his castmates, Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, Lisa Kudrow, Matt LeBlanc, and David Schwimmer, into megastars almost overnight.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if any of you listening aren't familiar with Friends. At the time it was airing, 50 million people were watching it. It's huge in streaming, huge in reruns. At the end, this was a big deal back then. Cast members were earning $1 million an episode at the time. But for Perry, there was a dark side to his life. He just put out a memoir actually last year called Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. That's where he recounted his lifelong struggle with addiction to alcohol, opioids. He said he recognized he was an alcoholic at age 21. He estimated he spent more than $7 million in an effort to get sober, including multiple stints in rehab. His substance abuse led to a number of serious health issues, including a hospitalization back in 2018 following a colon rupture that left him, he writes, with a 2% chance to live through the night. He acknowledged during that Friends reunion back in 2021 that the pressure to land a joke in front of a live studio audience night after night made him feel a lot of pressure. He told the LA Times earlier this year that nobody wanted to be famous more than me. I was convinced being famous was the answer. I was 25. It was the second year of Friends, and 8 months into it, I realized the American dream is not making me happy, not filling the holes in my life. I couldn't get enough attention. Fame does not do what you think it's going to do. It was all a trick. A very honest portrayal, an honest story. He was still presenting this memoir as recently as a few weeks ago, Jill. Again, too early to say what took place over the weekend, but I feel like this is one of those headlines that hit a lot of us like a ton of bricks on Saturday night. Like, do we need this right now? Do we need to lose a friend, a literal friend in Matthew Perry? I saw the headline on TMZ Saturday night. I was like, please be wrong, TMZ. And sadly, in fact, we lost Matthew Perry, which to our generation, I feel like if you're a Gen X or a millennial, that really hits home. It feels extra real because he was way too young.
Moshe, I think you're right. It's really shocking. And a lot of us of a certain generation feel like we kind of grew up with him. I saw somebody post, and it's like, you don't want to make a joke, but they're like, could it be any more sad? Because that was just his, it's, you say that, and that whole way that he kind of landed his jokes, it's just so typical him. And it's heartbreaking.
We're thankful for his incredible contributions and sadly a life cut too short.
All right, from Fox News, an update on that mass shooting in Maine. 2 nights after the shooting late Friday, law enforcement found the suspect, that mass killer, Robert Card, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound inside one of about 55 to 60 metal trailers in a recycling center's overflow parking lot. Authorities found a note to a loved one with his phone's passcode and bank account before he was found dead about a mile away from his abandoned car. Card indiscriminately opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle inside of a bowling alley and a bar in Lewiston, Maine on Wednesday, killing at least 18 people and injuring 13 more. Authorities say the paper note that he left behind wasn't, quote, an explicit suicide note, but the tone and tenor was that the individual was not going to be around.
And that came after a very scary couple nights in Maine as the manhunt continued before they found his body late Friday. And it comes as continuing questions are being asked about how he was able to obtain a gun despite having been put in a mental health facility and been very open about his mental health issues. A lot of warning signs here. The New York Times reports late Sunday that nearly 3 months before the shooting, a gun shop declined to let him complete his purchase of a firearm silencer after he disclosed on a form that he had mental health issues. That's according to the shop's owner. Apparently, in August, Card had gone to go pick up a silencer from one gun shop that he had purchased at another gun shop. But that gun owner dealing with the pickup noticed it in the form and said, absolutely not. I will not give this to you. And it's interesting because it meant that Card was actually acknowledging his mental health issues to gun shops while he was trying to buy stuff. And so the questions here about why he was able to have access to firearms will be key here in the investigation, and potential legislation and potential litigation coming out of all of this. Though, again, it appears here that he had the gun legally. If he bought them at a licensed dealer, he had to pass background checks. That included determining whether he was mentally fit to own a firearm. In a statement, the FBI says they had no information on Card in its background check system that would have prevented him from legally purchasing a gun. Jill, I'm learning more and more about this, but apparently if you voluntarily go to a mental health facility, you're not involuntarily committed, you can still own a gun after that. And certainly there's a lot of people asking whether or when, frankly, that law might need to be changed.
From CNBC, some pharmacy staff from Walgreens and other drugstore chains are planning to walk out starting today in the latest pushback against what they call unsafe working conditions that put both employees and patients at risk. Organizers of the effort and some pharmacy employees telling CNBC they hope the work stoppage will push companies to make meaningful changes to address the long-standing grievances of many retail pharmacy staff who have complained about having to grapple with what they describe as understaffed teams, insufficient pay, and increasing work expectations imposed by corporate management. The walkout has been dubbed by organizers as Pharmageddon, and it will occur Monday.
Who doesn't have a Geddon these days?
It's going to happen today through Wednesday across different pharmacy locations across the country, and it could tentatively affect hundreds of stores across different chains, although there is no definitive count of employees who will be participating in this effort. The bulk of those who have signaled that they plan to walk out are from Walgreens, which laid the groundwork for the initiative, and then employees from CVS and Rite Aid.
Yeah, it's a bunch of Walgreens pharmacists who've started here. They don't have a union, and there are talks of organizing a union here at some point for all these pharmacy employees who've been complaining that they have unreasonable performance demands and that things only got worse during COVID. In addition to all their existing responsibilities and cut back in staff, now they had to administer tests, vaccinations as well, which the pharmacies found profitable. So they told the pharmacists to focus more on that. We've heard some anecdotes about that from pharmacists in recent weeks. And they just can't juggle all these daily tasks, which can, they say, force errors and put patients at harm. I mean, keep in mind, this literally, you're going to the pharmacy to pick up drugs, and they have to measure things out and make sure they're putting the right thing in for the right person, giving you the proper warnings and side effects. And for many pharmacy staff, they say they've had it and they need more benefits. They need more support here. And so you're seeing more and more of this. We'll watch this unionization effort. It does come as we've seen a record number of walkouts, strikes or threatened strikes this year, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's UPS, whether it's the thing we've been watching with the auto workers. And this all started a few weeks ago at some Walgreens across the country, some CVS stores in Kansas City, and appears to be expanding here until they get what they want out of these large chains, you know, Walgreens and CVS being the largest pharmacies in the country.
All right, this from the Associated Press, a little Halloween news, an update on the price of candy, as well as a look at this year's trends. For the second year in a row, shoppers seeing double-digit inflation in the candy aisle. Candy and gum prices are up an average of 13% this month compared to last October, more than double the 6% increase in all of grocery prices. This is according to Data Assembly, a retail price tracker. And that is on top of a 14% increase in candy and gum prices in October of 2022.
Candy Geddon. Do they get a Geddon?
They should.
Yeah.
This firm saying their survey shows that about 1/3 of consumers plan to trade down to value or store brands when buying candy for trick-or-treaters this year. Weather is the main culprit for higher prices. Cocoa prices are trading at a 44-year high after heavy rains in West Africa caused limited production in the season that started last fall. And now El Nino conditions are making the region drier and likely to linger well into the spring.
Is that what Toto was singing about when they talked about the rains down in Africa? But in all seriousness, Jill, worst drought there in 20 years in certain parts of the region. Also, global sugar prices are at 12-year highs. India, which is the world's second largest sugar producer after Brazil, recently banned sugar exports for the first time in 7 years after monsoon rains there hurt their upcoming harvest. Thailand's output is down as well. So this is one of the factors we talk about when it comes to climate change. I mean, it has an impact on a lot of things you wouldn't necessarily expect. And so in this case, chocolate and candy prices, Hershey, which has raised prices by 7% or more in each of the last 7 quarters, acknowledged this week that higher prices are taking a toll, though, on demand, that they've reached a certain point where people are like, you know what, I'm going to buy less chocolate. But of course, it's Halloween. The National Retail Federation says that Halloween candy spending should hit a whopping $3.6 billion this year. That's a 16% jump, and that blows away previous highs. So people not letting these prices get in the way of their trick-or-treat candy. Overall Halloween spending this year, Jill, expected to be $12.2 billion. And I don't know that they counted your costumes from over the weekend. So they were homemade, right? You didn't spend too much?
Well, my husband, I think, had everything in the closet.
Michael, thank you for getting us to $12.2 billion in Halloween spending this year. And then there's the Halloween candy trends. Jill, I put a couple graphics here in our notes. Most popular Halloween candy nationwide, according to candystore.com. Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, though M&M's hot on their tail. Hot Tamales at 3, Skittles at 4, Sour Patch Kids at 5, Starburst 6th, Hershey Kisses 7, Candy Corn 8, Hershey Mini Bars 9, 10 Snickers. Jill, this is a big deal apparently. Candy corn back in the top 10 this year.
That feels inexplicable to me, given the taste of candy corn. But
everything comes back apparently. Yeah.
Candy corn, particularly popular in Utah.
Most popular candy there apparently, according to candystore.com.
In New York, you might expect to get yourself some Sour Patch Kids. That is the most popular.
Yeah, Nebraska too. Seeing California as an M&M land, Sour Patch Kids, Texas, Skittles, Oklahoma, Butterfinger in Wisconsin. Trying to see anything else that's interesting here among the various trend lines. Butterfinger, also big in Massachusetts. I see Almond Joy, number 1 in Connecticut, but neighboring Rhode Island, M&M land.
Which is why I'm going to be trick-or-treating in Rhode Island this year. See you
Rhode
there.
Island is number 1 M&M's, number 2 Twix, candy corn at number 3. But back to Utah. So candy corn number 1. Do you know what's number 2 in Utah? Again, Utah, what's going on here? Tootsie Pops, number 2 in Utah. All right. Now time for On This Day in History. On this day in 1918, the Ottoman Empire signed a treaty with the Allies. Though the Ottoman Empire had been in decline for a couple hundred years, the Turks basically running most of the Middle East. They had looked to be neutral in World War I. They did an alliance with the Germans. That didn't work out because Germany loses. And so it all falls apart for them. They signed this deal with the Europeans. The Europeans then go to carve up the Ottoman Empire, the French taking what would become Syria and Lebanon, the Brits taking what would become Iraq, Jordan, Israel, and the Palestinian territories. And Jill, we all know the rest.
Moshe, how is that going?
I don't Jill, it's been about 100 years. I'd say that I'm not sure that plan quite worked out, but here we are. All right. On this day in 1938, Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds aired on CBS radio, causing panic among thousands of listeners who thought there was an actual Martian invasion of Earth. A 23-year-old Orson Welles put out this broadcast at the time, people listening to the radio being like, oh my God, the Martians are invading. The FCC in the US would go on to investigate it, and they would put a stop to any kind of simulated news item. CBS, at the time, the Columbia Broadcasting System, agreed to take steps to avoid making a fiction broadcast sound like it was actual breaking news. So some responsibility, a little bit, for the media there, though it did help Orson Welles land a contract with Hollywood. Just a couple years later, he directed Citizen Kane. You might remember that film. And on this day, we'll move to the 21st century now. On this day in 2003, a basketball player by the name of LeBron James, you might have heard of him, who was drafted directly out of high school, makes his debut with the Cleveland Cavs. All right, a couple of music notes here before we go. On this day in 1968, Marvin Gaye scored his first number 1 hit with I Heard It Through the Grapevine.
Just about to lose my mind.
Yeah,
honey,
that feels
honey.
Like honey, honey.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, phew. Okay. I may not know what year it is, but at least I know my Motown hits.
It's the right song. On this day in 2015, fast forward, Adele went to #1 with Hello. It would go on to top the charts in 36 countries, including the US, where it reigned #1 for 10 consecutive weeks. Jill, I remember that time in 2015. Can we go back there?
A less complicated time, Moshe. Please take us back.
It feels like it. And finally, let's end with this. On this day in 1971, John Lennon put out his solo album, Imagine. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no religion too. Jill, I feel like we need that message more and more. Maybe John Lennon's Imagine will come true one day.
I don't want to get too preachy at the end of the podcast, but Moshe, we all do have to figure out how to coexist on this planet.
Amen, sister. Let's close it out.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
I'll see everyone tomorrow. Utahns, go out and get your candy corn. I hear it's almost sold out there.